It wasn't just rain. It was a punishment from God, crashing down to scour the earth of all color, leaving behind nothing but 50 shades of gray and black. The wipers of my old Ford thrashed against the windshield like epileptics, losing the battle against the deluge. I killed the engine, and the world narrowed down to the drumming of drops on the roof, a monotonous, maddening rhythm, like nails being hammered into the lid of a cheap coffin. I sat in the car for another minute, staring at the wrought iron gates of the Eden estate. Through the veil of the downpour, they looked like tangled briar branches frozen in iron. My jaw throbbed, a side effect of my third week without cigarettes. I popped another piece of nicotine gum, but the mint flavor had long ceased to mask the bitterness in my mouth. There was only a metallic taste and the phantom sensation of smoke in my lungs. "Come on, Corso," I croaked to myself, checking the rearview mirror at my red, sleep-deprived eyes. "Earn the paycheck, find the missing mutt, and get to a motel." I opened the door and immediately regretted it. Cold, damp air hit my face, smelling of wet earth, rotting apples, and ozone. That smell was everywhere here, the sickly sweet scent of decay masquerading as freshness. The estate owner, Mr. Vanderhoven, was waiting for me by the rose garden. He looked like a desiccated grasshopper wrapped in a cashmere coat worth my annual salary. Above him, like a black mushroom, loomed an umbrella held by a stone-faced guard. Vanderhoven didn't look at me. He was looking at a rose bush. "You're late, detective." His voice was shrill and rattling, the wind snatching his words away. "My time costs money." "So does mine," I grunted, stepping closer. My boots instantly sank into the waterlogged mud with a disgusting squelch. "Where exactly was your dog digging last?" The old man jerked his chin, pointing at the bush. It was the only spot of color in this gray hell. A Grand Prix rose. I had never seen a color like it. It wasn't just red. It was a thick, saturated crimson, almost black at the edges of the petals, as if the bud were engorged with venous blood. It glowed in the twilight rain, unnaturally, terrifyingly bright. But the leaves below had curled into yellow, sickly spirals covered in black spots. "It's wilting!" the old man almost shrieked, his voice holding more pain than if he were talking about a sick relative. "A Chelsea flower show winner, the pride of my collection, and that cursed dog. Brutus was digging here for 3 days straight. He damaged the root system, I'm sure of it. Dig, Corso. If you find that stupid beast's corpse, I'm deducting its cost from your check." I looked at the shovel protruding from the ground. The handle was slick with rain. I pulled off my leather gloves, shoved them into my trench coat pocket, and gripped the wood with bare hands. Inhale, impact. The metal sliced into the soil frighteningly easily. The earth here was too loose, greasy, well-tended. It seemed eager to accept something, or to give something back. I tossed heavy black clods aside. The rain intensified, turning the pit into a dirty mess that tried to suck my legs down deeper. "Careful!" the old man squealed when I dug too close to the stem. "Don't damage the roots. Do you have any idea how much effort went into breeding this hybrid?" I ignored him. A dull ache pulsed in my head. I expected to find a Doberman carcass here, maybe poisoned by neighbors, maybe just dead of old age and buried by a gardener too lazy to haul the carcass to the woods. Thud. Another thud. Clunk. The sound changed. The shovel hadn't hit stone or wood. It was a hollow, empty sound, like bone. I froze, knee-deep in mud. Water streamed down my nose, dripping from the brim of my hat straight into the pit. "What is it?" Vanderhoeven's voice trembled. "A rock? Drainage?" I crouched down, ignoring the hem of my coat dipping into the sludge. My fingers plunged into the cold, sticky earth. I felt an obstacle, hard, smooth, and meshed in a net of thin, elastic threads. The rose root went deep, thick and knobby. It pulsed under my fingers like a living artery. It was warm. I pulled on the root, trying to free the object from the mud, and then the earth screamed. It wasn't a mystical howl, but physics, the disgusting physics of decomposition. I shifted a layer of compressed clay, breaking the seal of the grave, and the accumulated gases escaped with a long, wheezing hiss. Zzz. The sound was like the final exhale of a dying giant. The smell hit right after the sound, the concentrated stench of rotting meat mixed with the cloying, sweet scent of roses, creating a nauseating cocktail that stole my breath away. Vanderhoven recoiled, covering his nose with a perfumed handkerchief. I clawed away the mud, washing off the black soil with the rainwater pooling at the bottom of the hole. Whiteness emerged from the darkness. It wasn't a dog bone. Dogs don't wear the remains of lace collars, and dogs don't have human clavicles. An hour later, the garden of the Eden estate ceased to be an aristocrat's quiet refuge. It had turned into a crime scene, illuminated by the harsh, surgically cold beams of floodlights. A generator rattled somewhere behind the bushes, drowning out the rain. Yellow police tape soaked through, turning into sad rags clinging to the perfect lawn. I stood to the side, watching the forensics team work. My coat was soaked through, but I didn't feel the cold. Adrenaline had pushed out the fatigue. "Capacitor charged," mumbled the photographer, a young kid in glasses he kept wiping with the sleeve of his raincoat. "Ween!" Flash. For a split second, the garden was lit with a deathly pale light, snatching twisted shadows of bushes from the darkness that looked like gnarled hands. We extracted the body with difficulty. The mud released its prey reluctantly, with a sucking sound, as if the swamp didn't want to share its secrets. It was a girl, or what was left of her. I'd seen plenty of corpses in 15 years of homicide, bloated drowning victims, burn victims charred beyond recognition, dismembered bodies from serial killers. But this? This was something else. The process of decay seemed to have stopped halfway, preserved. The skin had taken on a waxy, greenish tint, but the facial features remained frighteningly clear. "Jesus Christ," the forensic tech whispered, stumbling back. His foot slipped in the mud and he nearly fell right onto the body. The rose wasn't just growing over her, it was growing out of her. A thick, thorny stem, the width of my wrist, had punched through the rib cage, splaying the ribs. It wound around them like ivy on an old fence, grew into the bones, became part of the skeleton. Thin white roots stitched through soft tissues, exiting through the skin in tiny tendrils, making the body look like a fuzzy cocoon. But the worst part was the head. The main stem, the one holding that magnificent crimson bud, emerged directly from the skull's right eye socket. There was no eye, only the flower, its roots reaching deep into the brain. The orderlies unrolled a black bag. The sound of the zipper, zzz-ip, seemed louder to me than the thunder rumbling somewhere over the forest. "Corso, look at this," the tech called me over, leaning near the stem by the eye socket. He shone his flashlight. I crouched beside him, trying not to breathe through my nose. The smell of roses was so thick you could cut it with a knife. On the green skin of the stem, right where it exited the bone, were tiny, precise notches. They weren't natural scars or pest marks. "Those are numbers," I said, squinting against the light. A113. "Serial number?" The kid's voice shook. "No." I straightened up, feeling an icy drop roll down my collar. "It's a catalog. Someone is keeping track of the harvest, and this girl is just another specimen." I left them to bag the body and headed for the greenhouse. I needed to talk to the man who tended this garden. Vanderhoven said his head gardener, Arthur, practically lived there. The greenhouse greeted me with silence. After the cacophony of the downpour, police shouting, and radio static, it felt like a vacuum. The door slammed shut behind me, cutting off the sounds of the outside world. A damp, sticky heat reigned here. The air was heavy, saturated with oxygen and the aromas of hundreds of exotic flowers, making me instantly dizzy. The glass dome high above drummed under the rain, but the sound reached down as a dull, distant hum, as if we were underwater. I walked down the central aisle, skirting palms and giant ferns. My wet boots squeaked on the perfect tiles, leaving dirty tracks on the sterile cleanliness. In the center, at a massive stainless steel table, stood the man himself, Arthur. He was enormous. His back, clad in green coveralls, looked as wide as a bank vault door. He towered over the table like a mountain. He didn't turn at the sound of my footsteps. He was working. Snip, pause, snip. The sound of garden shears was rhythmic, soothing, and all at once terrifying. I approached. Tools lay on the table before him. I expected to see rusty secateurs and trowels. But this was the kit of a maniacal perfectionist: scalpels, tweezers, curved scissors, syringes of various calibers. Everything gleamed with chrome, laid out strictly by size on snow-white cloth. Not a speck of dust, not a smudge of dirt. "Police," I said loudly. The sound of my voice drowned in the wet moss covering the walls. Arthur froze. Slowly, very slowly, he turned. His face was devoid of emotion, a heavy jaw, deep-set eyes under overhanging brows. There was no fear or curiosity in those eyes, only a bottomless, dark void. He was mute, Vanderhoven had warned me, but his gaze spoke louder than any scream. "You are extraneous here. You are a weed that needs to be pulled." "He doesn't hear you the way you're used to, Detective." A quiet, melodic voice came from somewhere to the side. A wheelchair rolled out from behind the giant's broad back. In it sat a girl, Eliza, the owner's niece. She was Arthur's polar opposite, fragile, pale to the point of transparency, like a porcelain doll forgotten in a dark closet. Her thin fingers nervously picked at the hem of her dress. "Does he read lips?" I asked, not taking my eyes off the sharp shears in Arthur's hand. "He feels vibrations," Eliza answered cryptically. She made a quick fluttering gesture with a slender hand. Arthur blinked. It was the only movement on his face. He slowly placed the scissors on the table. Clack. Metal hit metal, and the sound echoed off the glass dome. "Ask him about the Grand Prix," I said, pulling out my notebook. The paper was damp and pulpy, the ink bleeding. "Ask who fertilized the rows in Sector 4 and why he didn't report the find if he was digging there." Eliza shifted her gaze to the giant, her fingers dancing in the air again, weaving complex signs. Arthur watched me without blinking, as if studying an insect before pinning it to a board. Then he slowly pulled the rubber glove off his right hand. The sound was nasty, thwack, like skin separating from meat. His palm was rough, earth-colored, covered in a web of tiny white scars. He took a scrap of paper from the table, grabbed a pencil stub, and wrote something quickly, pressing down hard. He handed the note to me. His fingers accidentally brushed my palm. They were cold as a corpse. I unfolded the paper. The handwriting was angular, jagged. The graphite had torn the paper in several places. "They like the taste of iron." I looked up, ready to demand an explanation, but Arthur had already turned away. He put the glove back on and picked up the shears. Snip. Another stem fell onto the table. The conversation was over. The city mortar always smelled the same, a mix of bleach, cheap coffee and hopelessness. But today, something alien intruded on that bouquet. Even the powerful ventilation couldn't pull out the sickly sweet, nauseating scent of Eden that seemed etched into my pores. Dr. Aris, our medical examiner, looked terrible, usually a cynical short guy who cracked jokes over dismembered bodies. Now he was as pale as the sheet covering the gurney. He nervously tapped a ballpoint pen against a metal instrument tray. Ting, ting, ting. The tiny, staccato sound was incredibly irritating. The refrigeration units hummed monotonously in the room, a low, vibrating drone that made my teeth ache. The cold light of the fluorescent lamps turned the skin of the corpse on the autopsy table gray-green. Though, looking closer, I realized it wasn't the lighting. She actually was greenish. "Corso, you have to see this." Aris didn't even say hello. His voice was raspy. "I've worked here 20 years. I've cut open drug mules full of cocaine and floaters picked clean by fish. But this is beyond the pale." He yanked the sheet back with a sharp motion. I swallowed thick saliva. The girl's open chest cavity looked like a flower pot turned inside out. Instead of lungs, there was a spongy, fibrous mass of intertwined roots. The heart was wrapped so tightly that muscle tissue was barely visible, a solid cocoon of whitish threads. "Cause of death?" I asked, trying to keep my voice professionally dry. "That's the thing, Mark." Aris took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, but his hands were shaking. "When they buried her, she was alive." I froze. A chill ran down my spine, hitting the back of my neck. Buried alive? Worse. Aris walked over to a microscope on the adjacent table and gestured for me to look. "Look, this is a sample from her carotid artery." I approached and pressed my eye to the eyepiece. Cells floated in the circle of light. I expected to see red blood cells, leukocytes, platelets, the usual picture. But there was almost no red. It was crowded out by long, green, thorny structures looking like microscopic worms. They were moving, slowly, pulsating, purposefully attacking the pathetic remnants of human cells. "It's chlorophyll, Mark." Aris's voice sounded somewhere above my ear, full of horror and scientific awe. "Genetically modified, aggressive, predatory. The rose didn't just parasite on the body, it replaced her blood with its own nutrient solution. Its symbiosis driven to a nightmare. The girl was turned into a living incubator. She was dying for weeks, feeling the roots grow into every capillary, but couldn't move. The plant secretes a powerful neurotoxin. It paralyzes the muscles but leaves the consciousness clear. She felt everything, Corso, until the very last second." I recoiled from the microscope. I felt sick. That rose in the rain stood before my eyes, bright, crimson, pulsating. So the flower fed on her fear, her biochemistry, and her hemoglobin. The iron in the blood gave the petals that saturated color. Do you understand? They literally drank her dry, replacing the human with the plant. The dead silence of the morgue was suddenly shattered by my phone. I flinched, nearly knocking over the instrument tray. The ringtone sounded like an air raid siren. The screen lit up. Eden Estate, Eliza. I pressed answer, jamming the phone to my ear. "Corso?" she whispered. Her voice was quiet, breaking, full of panic. In the background, I could hear the sound of rain, which had intensified again. "What happened?" "Eliza, speak up." Uncle fell asleep after his medication, and Arthur left the house. He went into the green labyrinth." "So what? He's the gardener." "He has a sack on his shoulder, detective. A big, black plastic sack. It's heavy, and it—" A pause hung in the line. I heard only her ragged breathing. "The sack is moving." I gunned the Ford back to the estate, ignoring speed limits. The rain had stopped pouring in sheets but left behind a thick, sticky fog that crawled from the river, shrouding the road in a white shroud. The gates of Eden were open. The guard was gone. I did not like that. I ditched the car at the main entrance and ran toward the labyrinth. The entrance loomed before me like the maw of a mythical beast, a living hedge 3 meters high, perfectly trimmed boxwood, dense as a brick wall. The foliage glistened with moisture, black in the night. I pulled my gun. The click of the safety sounded unnaturally loud in the viscous silence. "Eliza!" I called out, but the fog swallowed my voice. I stepped inside. The world narrowed to the beam of my tactical flashlight. The light darted over wet leaves. Water droplets sparkled in it like scattered diamonds. Crunch! A twig snapped under my foot like dry bone. The labyrinth played games with sound. I heard my footsteps, splash, splash, on the wet ground, but the echo returned them with a delay, as if someone was walking behind, trying to keep step. I stopped, listening. The echo stopped too, but not immediately. An extra shuffling sound came from somewhere to the left. "Shh! Arthur!" I shouted, sweeping the barrel from side to side. "Police, come out!" The only answer was the hoot of an owl somewhere high in an oak tree. Hoo, hoo. The sound was mournful, desolate. I moved on, trying to breathe every other second to calm the thundering of my own heart. Badoom, badoom. It felt like the rhythm was audible to the entire garden. The flashlight beam swept around a turn and hit a white face. I jerked, my finger tightening on the trigger. It was a statue, a marble figure of a nymph half hidden in overgrown foliage. But something was wrong with it. The sculptor was either a genius or a madman. The nymph's face was twisted in a grimace of animal terror, hands thrust forward as if trying to push away something invisible advancing on her. In the shaky light of the flashlight, the shadows fell in such a way that the statue's eyes looked alive. It seemed they were watching me, begging me to run. Paranoia washed over me in a wave. It felt like the bush branches were reaching for my clothes, trying to hold me back. The smell of rotting leaves and wet earth became suffocating. In the center of one of the labyrinth sections, in a small dead end, I found what I was looking for. A fresh pit. The earth had been turned very recently. Black clods shone with greasy moisture. A shovel lay nearby, discarded in haste. I ran to the edge, aimed the light down, expecting to see the black sack Eliza spoke of, expecting to see movement. But the pit was empty. Only at the bottom, in a puddle of dirty water, floated a single rose petal, black as dried blood. And then, right behind my back, very close, no more than a couple of meters, there was a distinct, dry crack. Someone stepped on a branch. Someone heavy. I smelled it. Not flowers. The smell of stale sweat, machine oil, and raw earth. I didn't turn around or ask questions. Instinct, honed by years on the streets, screamed, "Run!" I dove into a side passage, tearing through prickly boxwood branches that whipped my face. The fog was disorienting, turning the labyrinth into an endless gray corridor with no beginning and no end. Ahead, through the haze, the dark silhouette of a structure loomed, an old abandoned greenhouse. The glass was cloudy, covered with a layer of age-old grime and moss. The metal frame had rusted and looked like the skeleton of a giant beast. I ran to the door, yanked the handle. It gave way with a nasty screech. Stumbling inside, I slammed the door and propped it shut with an old wooden crate. The silence here was different. Dead. Inside, it smelled of mustiness, mold, and dry chemicals. The drumming of drops on the glass roof sounded louder here, like a drum roll. I shone my flashlight. It was a graveyard of plants. Rows of pots stood everywhere with withered, blackened stems looking like the gnarled fingers of witches. The buzzing of a fat fly beating against the glass seemed deafening. Bzzz. In the far corner stood a rough wooden workbench. Chaos reigned there. Jars, vials, spilled soil, some tubes. I walked closer. In the middle of the table lay a thick diary in leather binding. The pages were damp and warped from humidity. I opened it at random. The handwriting was jerky, dancing, mad. Chemical formulas were interspersed with drawings of anatomical dissections. NPK 153015. Not enough phosphorus. Maria absorbs poorly. Need more calcium. Maria? The name of the girl who went missing a month ago. I turned the page with trembling fingers. Robert. Too much nitrogen. Rotted in a week. Ratio error. Arthur must dig deeper. Roots require darkness. The flashlight beam slipped aside and landed on a large glass jar standing next to the diary. A yellowed label was pasted on it, written by hand in beautiful calligraphy full of flourishes. Bone meal, premium. The jar was filled with a grayish-white powder with large, hard inclusions. I picked up the jar. Heavy. Something hard clinked against the glass from the inside. I shone the light right through the glass. My heart skipped a beat. Amid the gray dust lay a human molar, a large back tooth with long yellow roots, and next to it another, smaller, and a fragment of something suspiciously resembling the phalanx of a pinky finger. The jar slipped from my sweating hands. Crash! The sound of breaking glass rang like a gunshot in the silence of the greenhouse. Shards and human teeth scattered across the concrete floor with a merry tinkle. In that same second, I heard a crash behind me. The greenhouse door, which I had propped with the crate, shuddered from a powerful blow from the outside. The crate flew aside, but the door didn't open. The bolt clicked. Ka-clack! I was locked in. And immediately after that came a quiet, sinister hissing. From above, from the rusted pipes of the irrigation system under the ceiling, poured neither steam nor water. A thick, yellowish smoke began to fill the space. Fumigator. Industrial poison for insects. I instinctively covered my mouth with my coat sleeve, coughing. My eyes began to sting mercilessly. My throat seized in a spasm. In the murky fog behind the dirty glass of the greenhouse, a shadow flickered. A huge, motionless shadow. It wasn't leaving. It stood and watched, waiting for me to stop twitching. The air ceased to be air. It turned into a chemical weapon. The hissing from above sounded like the voice of 1,000 angry snakes. The yellowish, oily fog descended from the ceiling in heavy billows, filling the greenhouse space with a nauseating sweetness. It wasn't just gas, it was death packaged in an aerosol. I took a breath and immediately regretted it. It felt like my throat had been wrapped in barbed wire and yanked sharp. My lungs flared with fire. I coughed, doubling over, and every spasm echoed in my temples like a hammer blow. My vision darkened. Black spots danced at the edges of my sight. Insecticide. Industrial filth for poisoning parasites. And right now, the main parasite here was me. Not here, flashed through my fading consciousness. Just not like this, not among jars of teeth and rotten ferns. I tried to feel for the door, but my fingers met only cold wood, slimy with condensation. The bolt on the outside held fast. Whoever locked me in wanted me to die slowly, coughing up my own lungs in chunks. I needed to break the glass. I turned to the workbench, knocking jars aside with my elbow. The sound of glass breaking seemed distant, as if my ears were stuffed with cotton. My hand hit something heavy, metallic, an old cast-iron press. I grabbed it with both hands, feeling my muscles fill with leaden weakness. The gas worked fast, paralyzing the nervous system. My legs turned to cotton. "Come on, Corso," I wheezed, spitting out viscous saliva. I twisted my whole torso, putting the inertia of my falling body into the throw. The press flew at the cloudy, grime-covered window. Crash! But right now, in front of me, was not a killer. His broad, coarse face was twisted in a grimace of grief. Tears flowed from his eyes, carving light tracks in the mud on his cheeks. I shifted my gaze to his hands. He clutched them to his chest, curled into a fetal position, as if protecting the most precious treasure in the world. Hands. The sound was deafening and beautiful. The old glass couldn't hold, spraying outward in a rain of sharp shards. Night wind burst into the jagged hole, cold, wet, smelling of ozone and mud. It hit me in the face like a slap, bringing me to my senses. I threw myself at the window, not feeling the pain as the sharp teeth of the remaining glass in the frame bit into my palms and side. I tumbled over the sill, falling like a sack onto the wet grass. The first breath of clean air was like a sip of ice water after a week in the desert. I retched. A spasm twisted my stomach, expelling bile onto the grass. I stayed on all fours under the pouring rain, coughing and spitting out chemical bitterness while the rain washed the poisonous residue off me. Lightning flashed. For a split second, the garden turned into a black and white photograph. And I saw him. 10 meters away, at the corner of the greenhouse, stood a figure. Tall, wrapped in a dark rubberized raincoat with a deep hood. He stood motionless, watching my convulsions. He was waiting for me to die in there. Seeing me lift my head, the figure jerked. The man turned and bolted toward the forest. "Freeze!" My shout sounded like a crow's caw. I forced myself to stand. The world swayed like a ship's deck in a storm, but rage proved stronger than poison. I reached for my holster. The Glock was there, heavy and reliable. I ran. This wasn't a chase from a Hollywood action movie. It was a dirty, heavy struggle with the earth that didn't want to let us go. My boots slipped on greasy mud, sliding in different directions. I fell, got up, ran again, splashing through puddles. Branches whipped my face, leaving burning stripes. The figure ahead moved strangely. The man was limping. He dragged his left leg, yet moved with frightening speed and power, crashing through the undergrowth like a wounded moose. We went deeper into the forest. It was darker here. Trees interlaced their crowns, blocking the sky, and only rare flashes of the storm pierced the foliage, snatching fragments of trunks. "Police! Stop or I shoot!" I yelled, blowing out my voice. The answer was only the cracking of branches and the fugitive's heavy breathing, overpowering the noise of the rain. He knew the forest. He wove between trees, trying to shake me. But I heard him, heard the wheeze, heard the stomp. I was a hound on a scent, and the hunter's instinct eclipsed the pain in my poisoned lungs. Suddenly, the forest ended. We burst out onto the edge of an old ravine, where the ground dropped away down to the river. Below, in the darkness, the water roared, swelling from the downpour. The fugitive skidded to a halt at the very edge. His feet slid on the clay. He flailed his arms, trying to keep his balance. That moment was enough for me. I didn't shoot. I jumped. My shoulder slammed into his back with the force of a freight train. The impact knocked the wind out of him. We both flew into the mud, locked in a ball, and rolled down the slope. The world spun. Sky, earth, roots, sky again. Impact against a rock, pain in my ribs. We stopped 1/2 meter from the drop-off. I ended up on top. Adrenaline boiled in my blood. I pinned his neck to the ground with my forearm, pressing his face into the mud. With my other hand, I pressed the barrel of the gun to the back of his head. "Don't twitch," I growled into his ear, trying to shout over the thunder. One move and your brains will fertilize this slope. Do you understand me?" The man under me froze. He didn't try to throw me off, though I felt the power of his body. The muscles under the raincoat were hard as wood. He lay there and trembled. A large tremor shook his massive frame. I expected a roar, curses, an attempt to stab me. Instead, I heard a sound I least expected to hear here. A sob, hollow, guttural, full of despair. I yanked the hood off him. Another flash of lightning tore the sky, and in its deathly light I saw the face. It was Arthur, the same mute giant gardener I saw in the greenhouse with the shears, the monster all the evidence pointed to. "Freeze!" I barked, but not as confidently. "Show me your hands. What do you have there? Detonator? Knife?" Arthur slowly, warily unclenched his huge, earth-covered palms. There was no weapon. There, in a handful of damp soil, lay a tiny, pathetic seedling, a weak green sprout with 2 little leaves and thin rootlets. It looked so fragile in those massive hands capable of breaking necks. I loosened my grip, feeling my neat investigation theory crumble to dust. "What is this?" I asked, moving the gun away from his head but keeping it ready. "Why did you run?" Arthur sat up, wiping his nose with his sleeve. He looked at me, then at the seedling broken in the scuffle, and in his eyes I read such pain that I felt ill. He couldn't speak. He started looking around, seeking a way to explain. He poked a finger into the wet clay of the cliff, smoothed a patch with his palm, and began to write, slowly tracing each letter with a thick finger. S-A-V-E. I frowned, peering at the letters, which the rain was immediately washing away. Save? Who? The girls? Arthur nodded furiously. He made a throat sound like a groan and started writing again, hurrying, breaking his fingernails on stones in the soil. I dug up, transplant, so they live, cure in roots. I read, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. You didn't kill them?" I whispered. My voice wavered. "You dug up the bodies to try and separate the plants? You tried to cure them?" Arthur nodded, looking me straight in the eye. He was begging me to believe. Then he did something that made me recoil. He slowly rolled the wet sleeve of his coveralls up to the shoulder. In the flashlight beam, the skin looked monstrous. His arm was covered with inflamed sores and bumps, but it wasn't an infection. Under the skin, swollen into knots, pulsed green veins. They intertwined, forming a pattern like a root system. At the crook of the elbow, breaking through the skin, a tiny, unopened red bud protruded. "You're infected," I exhaled. "You touched them without protection." Arthur looked at his arm with hatred. He knew he was doomed. He wasn't a mad scientist. He was the only person in this cursed house trying to stop the nightmare, using the only thing he knew, gardening. "Who?" I asked, grabbing his healthy shoulder. "Arthur, who did this to them? Who turns people into fertilizer? Vanderhoven? Eliza? Write the name." The giant's eyes widened. Fear flickered in them, not for himself, for someone else. He opened his mouth, his lips trembling, trying to form a soundless word. He reached for the ground to write the answer. Thwack! The sound was short, dry, barely audible over the roar of the river and the noise of the rain, like someone breaking a dry branch. Arthur jerked his whole body as if hit by an electric shock. His eyes glazed over. The expression of pleading froze on his face like a mask. He slowly, very slowly brought his hand to his throat. Protruding from his neck, right under the Adam's apple, was a short shaft, a crossbow bolt. But instead of plastic fletching, the stabilizers were stiff, lacquered rose leaves. Blood, thick and dark, gushed onto his chest. "No!" I lunged at him, trying to stem the wound with my hands. "Arthur, hold on!" He tried to inhale, but made only a wet, gurgling sound. The giant's heavy body swayed backward. He lost his balance on the slippery edge of the cliff. Gravity won. Arthur collapsed backward into the black abyss. I managed to grab only air. A second later, a heavy splash came from below, immediately swallowed by the turbulent current of the river. I was left alone, on the edge of a cliff, under freezing rain, with hands stained in the blood of an innocent man. Instinct worked faster than my brain. I dropped flat into the mud, pressing into the earth as if I wanted to dissolve into it. The shooter was somewhere close. A crossbow is a quiet weapon, the weapon of a hunter who doesn't want to spook the game too early. Reloading takes time, but he might have a second one. I lay there, feeling the cold sludge soak my clothes, and listened to the forest. Now every sound was an enemy. The rustle of foliage seemed like footsteps, the creak of wood, a bowstring being drawn. Who was it? Who could shoot with such precision in the dark, in the rain? I reached into my pocket for my phone, pulled it out. The screen was a spiderweb of cracks, must have smashed it in the fall. It was dead. No connection, no backup. I was alone in the woods with a psychopath armed with a medieval weapon. "Think, Corso, think," I whispered to myself to drown out the panic. Arthur wanted to write a name. He knew the killer, and the killer knew Arthur was about to crack. That means he was watching us. He trailed us all the way from the greenhouse. I need to get back to the house. Eliza is there, a fragile girl in a wheelchair. If Arthur was trying to save someone, it was surely her. Now she's left unprotected. I crawled back into the shadow of the trees, trying not to lift my head. The way back to the estate turned into a paranoid nightmare. I moved in dashes, tree to tree, holding my gun in front of me. The forest seemed like a living organism, hostile and hungry. Roots snagged my feet. Wet branches touched my face like cold fingers. I thought I saw a silhouette in a raincoat behind every trunk. 20 minutes later, which felt like an eternity, I saw lights. The Eden mansion was glowing. It was strange, wrong, ominous. After all the horror, corpses in the garden, gas, chases, murder, the house looked as if they were preparing for a gala reception. The ground floor windows were brightly lit with warm, golden light. The terrace door was ajar, and the wind billowed heavy velvet curtains. I crept closer, hiding behind marble lion statues at the grand staircase. It was quiet inside, too quiet for a house where hell was breaking loose. I gripped the gun tighter, wiped a wet palm on my pants, and stepped onto the terrace. I walked inside. The contrast hit my senses like a sledgehammer. A second ago, I was in a wet, cold hell, and now I stood on polished mahogany parquet. It didn't smell of rot and rain here, but of expensive wax, old paper, polish, and a barely perceptible sweet scent of lavender. Warmth enveloped me, but that only made it scarier. I felt like a dirty stain on a flawless canvas. The silence of the house was broken by music. It flowed from deep down the hallway, from an antique gramophone. Vivaldi, The Four Seasons, Winter, First Movement. Da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. Sharp, staccato, prickly sounds of violins. Tense, icy. This music didn't soothe. It pulled nerves tight like strings ready to snap. It suited this house perfectly, beautiful, mathematically precise, and ruthless. I walked down the corridor, leaving muddy footprints on expensive Persian rugs. "Vanderhoven?" I called out. My voice sounded hollow. "Eliza? Police?" No one answered. Only the violins continued their mad run, picking up the tempo. I reached the small parlor. The doors were thrown open. A fire burned in the fireplace. Logs crackled cozily, casting dancing shadows on walls hung with antique botanical engravings in gold frames. In the center of the room, back to the fire, stood a deep Voltaire armchair upholstered in green leather. In it sat the master of the house, Mr. Vanderhoven. He was dressed impeccably, black tuxedo, starched shirt, bow tie. His hands rested loosely on the armrests. His head was tilted slightly back. He would have looked asleep, if not for one detail. I walked closer, feeling everything inside me turn cold. A rose was growing out of his open mouth, a magnificent black velvet rose on a thick stem. It emerged deep from his throat, forcing the old man's jaws unnaturally wide, almost dislocating them. The flower had fully bloomed, covering half his face like a mask. Thorns on the stem pierced his lips from the inside. Drops of blood, already dried, ran down his chin in black tracks onto the snow-white dicky. Vanderhoven was dead. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling with an expression of extreme astonishment mixed with pain. His skin had taken on that same waxy greenish tint as the girl in the garden. This wasn't just murder. It was an installation. Art. The maniac hadn't just eliminated a witness, they had created a still life. On the table nearby, where a glass of whiskey would usually stand, lay a menu card made of thick paper with gold embossing. I leaned down and read it. Main course, rebirth. Dessert, eternity. The music got louder. The violins shrieked, reaching a crescendo, drilling into my brain. "Detective!" A quiet, pain-filled sob cut through the music. I spun around, raising my gun, aiming at the shadow by the library entrance. Slowly, a wheelchair rolled out of the darkness. Eliza. She looked like a ghost. She was wearing a long white lace dress, vintage, like something from a past era. Her face was pale, tear-stained, mascara smeared around huge, frightened eyes, making them look like black hollows. Her thin fingers convulsively gripped the wheels of the chair, knuckles white from tension. "Eliza!" I lowered the weapon, exhaling. My heart was pounding like crazy. "Thank God. You're unhurt?" I stepped toward her, hiding the gun behind my back so as not to scare her further. "He killed him!" she whispered, pointing a trembling finger at her uncle's corpse with the rose in his mouth. "He made me watch, Detective. He said it was beautiful." I went down on one knee before her, so our eyes were on the same level. My old protector instinct, the very one that ruined my career 3 years ago, reared its head again. Before me was a victim, a child in hell. "Who?" I asked softly. "Arthur?" Eliza shook her head, tears spurting from her eyes. "No! Arthur tried to help! Poor Arthur! It's the doctor! Dr. Green, our family physician." "The doctor?" He is obsessed with botany. He told Uncle that humans are imperfect, that we are just sacks of bones that rot, but plants are eternal. He was injecting Uncle with these spores under the guise of medication. Uncle knew but feared him. He forced me to stay silent." Her story was disjointed, hysterical, soaked in fear, but it was logical. The doctor. Of course, knowledge of anatomy, access to chemicals, ability to come to the house without suspicion. Arthur was just a scapegoat, a blunt instrument, and Eliza a hostage in her own home. "Hush, hush." I covered her cold hand with mine. It was icy. "It's all over. Arthur is dead, but I'm here. I won't let anyone hurt you." I stood up, feeling a surge of strength. The fatigue receded. Now I had a goal. I had an enemy with a name, and I had someone to save at any cost. "I'll call for backup as soon as I find a working phone. Barricade yourself in here." I pulled out the magazine, checked the rounds. 3 left. Not much, but enough. "Are there weapons in the house?"
"In Uncle's study. In the desk," she whispered, wiping tears with a lace handkerchief. "Mark—" She used my first name for the first time. It sounded intimate and touching. "Yes? Can I have some water, please? My throat is dry from screaming." "Of course, right away." I saw a crystal carafe of water and glasses on a commode by the wall, about 5 meters away. "I'll be right back." I turned my back to Eliza. For the first time that night, I allowed myself to relax my shoulders. I felt like the hero of a noir novel finally doing something right. I walked to the commode, picked up the heavy carafe. Crystal clinked quietly against the rim of the glass. Ting! Clear water poured with a quiet, soothing gurgle. And then I heard it. The sound behind my back changed. I expected to hear the squeak of rubber tires on parquet or the soft rustle of dress fabric, but I heard something else. Click, click, click. Hard, confident, rhythmic sound. Wood striking wood. The click of heels. My hand with the carafe froze in midair. Water overflowed the glass, spilled onto the polished wood of the commode, dripping onto the floor, but I didn't notice. Time stopped. Invalids don't walk. Invalids don't wear high heels. The puzzle in my head, which I had been so diligently assembling, exploded, shattering into thousands of shards, each cutting me to the quick. Arthur tried to save them. Transplant. They like the taste of iron. Green veins on the gardener's arms. He was infected because he touched them, touched the children. And Eliza, fragile, pale Eliza who couldn't walk. The Vivaldi music cut out. The gramophone needle reached the end of the track and now made only a rhythmic, dry, scratching sound. Shtuck, shtuck. In the ensuing silence, I heard behind my back, very close, so close I felt the movement of air, large metal blades opening, slowly, relishingly, with anticipation. A quiet, pain-filled sob cut through the music. I spun around, raising my gun, aiming at the shadow by the library entrance. Slowly, a wheelchair rolled out of the darkness. Eliza. She looked like a ghost. She was wearing a long white lace dress, vintage, like something from a past era. Her face was pale, tear-stained, mascara smeared around huge, frightened eyes, making them look like black hollows. Her thin fingers convulsively gripped the wheels of the chair, knuckles white from tension. "Eliza!" I lowered the weapon, exhaling. My heart was pounding like crazy. "Thank God. You're unhurt?" I stepped toward her, hiding the gun behind my back so as not to scare her further. "He killed him," she whispered, pointing a trembling finger at her uncle's corpse with the rose in his mouth. "He made me watch, Detective. He said it was beautiful." I went down on one knee before her so our eyes were on the same level. My old protector instinct, the very one that ruined my career 3 years ago, reared its head again. Before me was a victim, a child in hell. "Who?" I asked softly. "Arthur?" Eliza shook her head, tears spurting from her eyes. "No, Arthur tried to help. Poor Arthur." "It's the doctor. Dr. Green, our family physician." "The doctor?" He is obsessed with botany. He told Uncle that humans are imperfect, that we are just sacks of bones that rot, but plants are eternal. He was injecting Uncle with these spores under the guise of medication. Uncle knew, but feared him. He forced me to stay silent." Her story was disjointed, hysterical, soaked in fear. but it was logical. The doctor, of course, knowledge of anatomy, access to chemicals, ability to come to the house without suspicion. Arthur was just a scapegoat, a blunt instrument, and Eliza a hostage in her own home. Hush, hush. I covered her cold hand with mine. It was icy. It's all over. Arthur is dead, but I'm here. I won't let anyone hurt you. I stood up, feeling a surge of strength. The fatigue receded. Now I had a goal. I had an enemy with a name, and I had someone to save at any cost. I'll call for backup as soon as I find a working phone. Barricade yourself in here. I pulled out the magazine, checked the rounds. 3 left. Not much, but enough. Are there weapons in the house? In Uncle's study, in the desk, she whispered, wiping tears with a lace handkerchief. Mark! She used my first name for the first time. It sounded intimate and touching. Yes? Can I have some water, please? My throat is dry from screaming. Of course, right away. I saw a crystal carafe of water and glasses on a commode by the wall, about 5 meters away. I'll be right back. I turned my back to Eliza. For the first time that night, I allowed myself to relax my shoulders. I felt like the hero of a noir novel finally doing something right. I walked to the commode, picked up the heavy carafe. Crystal clinked quietly against the rim of the glass. Ting! Clear water poured with a quiet, soothing gurgle. And then I heard it. The sound behind my back changed. I expected to hear the squeak of rubber tires on parquet or the soft rustle of dress fabric, but I heard something else. Click, click, click. Hard, confident, rhythmic sound, wood striking wood, the click of heels. My hand with the carafe froze in mid-air. Water overflowed the glass, spilled on the polished wood of the commode, dripping on the floor, but I didn't notice. Time stopped. Invalids don't walk. Invalids don't wear high heels. The puzzle in my head, which I had been so diligently assembling, exploded, shattering into thousands of shards, each cutting me to the quick. Arthur tried to save them. Transplant. They like the taste of iron. Green veins on the gardener's arms. He was infected because he touched them, touched the children. And Eliza, fragile, pale Eliza, who couldn't walk. The Vivaldi music cut out. The gramophone needle reached the end of the track and now made only a rhythmic, dry, scratching sound. Shh-tuk, shh-tuk. In the ensuing silence, I heard behind my back, very close, so close I felt the movement of air, large metal blades opening, slowly, relishingly, with anticipation. I dashed to the cart. Eliza noticed my movement. "Seize him!" she screamed. A root, thick as a python, lunged at me, coiled around my ankle, and yanked. I fell, hitting my shoulder on the tile. I was dragged backward, toward a tub where the twisted face of a teenager with branches instead of hair stuck out of the earth. I kicked the root with my free foot, feeling thorns tear pant leg and skin. Crawled to the cart, grabbed a bottle of expensive cognac, smashed the neck against the table edge, doused the nearest bush, a creature that used to be a woman. She shrieked, feeling the alcohol on open wounds. "No!" Eliza screamed. "Don't you dare touch them!" I flicked the lighter. A flame flared, small and yellow. "Eat dirt, bitch!" I wheezed, and threw the lighter. The alcohol fumes ignited instantly. Whoosh! Fire engulfed the mutant. The dry foliage covering it went up like gunpowder. The creature thrashed in agony. Its screech went ultrasonic, bursting capillaries in my nose. The fire jumped to the curtains, then to the dry vines hanging from the ceiling. The winter garden was turning into a furnace. Eliza screamed. It wasn't a cry of pain, it was the wail of a mother watching her children be murdered. She forgot about me. She threw herself at the burning creature, trying to beat out the flames with her bare hands, not noticing the fire jumping to her lace dress. "Hush! Hush! Mama's here!" she muttered, her voice breaking into madness. I stood up, clutching my wounded leg. The heat was becoming unbearable. The glass dome overhead began to crack from the temperature. Crack! I needed to get out, now. But the path to the doors was cut off by a wall of fire. The only option was the window, a huge panoramic window overlooking the cliff. I grabbed a heavy floor vase and hurled it at the glass. The window shattered, and wind rushed in, fanning the flames even higher. I already had a leg on the sill when I heard a horrific sound behind me. I turned back. Eliza stood in the middle of the firestorm. Her dress was burning, skin melting, revealing green, fibrous flesh underneath. But it wasn't the fire that destroyed her. Her favorite hybrid, the very creature she tried to save, in agony and panic, didn't recognize its mistress. The plant reflexes reacted to the touch of flesh. The mutant's huge burning branch arms closed around Eliza. Thorns as long as a finger plunged into her body, piercing lungs, stomach, throat. "No," she rasped, looking into the empty eyes of her creation. I created you!" The plant tightened its embrace. A sickening, wet crunch of breaking bones was heard. Eliza was pulled inside the burning bush, becoming the final fertilizer for her garden. She vanished into a ball of fire and thorns, and her final scream merged with the howl of the burning plants. I rolled over the sill and fell out into the cold, saving mud. I crawled through the grass, moving away from the burning house. The heat melted the skin on my back, but the rain, freezing and strong, cooled me. Behind me, a crash echoed. The dome of the winter garden collapsed, burying Eliza and her nightmarish collection. A pillar of sparks shot into the black sky, mixing with the lightning. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. They were getting closer. Police, fire, medics. They were driving toward the light of the fire. I rolled onto my back, exposing my face to the rain. It was over. I was alive, wounded, burned, poisoned by gas, but alive. I closed my eyes, listening to the frantic rhythm of my heart slowing down. "Over here! We have a survivor!" A voice punched through the noise of the rain. Flashlight beams hit my face. 2 men in paramedic uniforms ran up to me. "Detective Corso?" A young medic leaned over me. "Can you hear me? Don't move, you might have fractures." He started quickly palpating me, cutting through the remains of my trench coat soaked in mud and chemicals. "He has a laceration on the shoulder," he shouted to his partner, "and deep cuts on the legs, massive blood loss. Prep the plasma." I tried to smile. "I'm fine, Doc. Just give me a cigarette." The medic wasn't listening. He brought a gauze pad to the wound on my shoulder, the one I got at the very beginning when digging the grave, or the one Eliza's shears left. I didn't remember anymore. The pain was gone. In its place came a strange, deep calm, numbness. The medic pulled the gauze pad away and froze. He brought it closer to the flashlight beam. "What the?" he whispered. I struggled to look down. There was a stain on the white gauze, but it wasn't red. It was thick, emerald green, like the juice of a crushed stem. His blood is clotting too fast," the medic shook in panic. It's thickening, like jelly. Pulse is dropping. 40 beats. 30. I raised my hand, brought it to my eyes. In the light of the flashers, I saw it. Under the skin on my wrist, the veins were no longer blue. They were bright green, bulging.
They pulsed slowly, sluggishly.
I saw a tiny, tender sprout breaking through a scratch on my finger. The puzzle clicked. The final piece. That scratch in the garden, at the very beginning, when I was digging. The spores weren't just in the doctor's syringes. They were in the soil, in the air, in the rose thorns. Eliza knew. "You are a perfect specimen, Mark. Excellent nitrogen." She didn't intend to kill me right away. She was waiting. The process had started long ago. I was already part of the garden when I walked into this house. "We're losing him!" the medic shouted somewhere very far away. His voice sounded muffled, as if I were sinking underwater. "Defibrillator! Clear!" My body jerked from the shock, but there was no pain. There was only warmth. I felt roots growing through my muscles, braiding around my bones, replacing nerves. It didn't hurt. It felt right. My legs, so tired of running, were now rooting into the earth. My lungs, burned by gas, filled with the freshness of photosynthesis. The noise of the sirens faded, turning into the rustle of wind and foliage. The shouts of humans became the buzzing of bees. The world slowed down. I looked at the sky. It was no longer black. It was full of colors I hadn't noticed before. I felt something rising in my chest, to my throat. Not a scream, not a word, a bud. "They say roses love rain," passed through my fading consciousness as the last coherent thought. "I hope I'll be bright red, Grand Prix, a winner." My lips parted, but there was no air left to inhale. Darkness covered me, but it wasn't the empty darkness of death. It was the warm, moist, nourishing darkness of soil. Silence, absolute ringing silence. And in that silence, a single sound rang out, the wet, juicy, loud crunch of opening petals.